Okay, let's dive into this. Here's something that, well, I might surprise you a bit.
Oh, yeah.
A significant number of Christians who actually move to the UK, they end up choosing to worship in, native British churches.
Right. That's often overlooked, isn't it? People tend to focus on the new churches migrants start themselves.
Exactly, and that's where we're focusing today. This deep dive is all about the experiences of these individuals. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, I think, is that we're not looking at those migrant-led churches, as you say. Instead, we're digging into how migrants are integrating or trying to integrate within existing congregations. It gives a really different angle on the UK's changing religious scene.
It really does. And for this deep dive, we've got some really compelling research. It focuses on one specific church.
Which one?
It's a local ecumenical partnership, where different denominations decide to work together. An LEP church in a new town out in the east of England. And the key thing here, it's not about the usual mission to migrants idea.
No.
It's exploring this, I guess, potentially revolutionary idea of mission by migrants happening right there within these established communities.
And understanding the sources is crucial here, isn't it? We're talking about a study that used semi-structured interviews, group discussions too,
Right.
with first-generation adult migrants. They made up about, 15% of that particular church's congregation?
Yeah, about that. And from quite diverse backgrounds.
Definitely. Mostly Africa. I think it was around 73%.
That's right.
And then Asia, specifically Kerala and India, that was about 20%. And a smaller group from Europe, maybe 7%.
And these aren't necessarily recent arrivals struggling with the language either.
No, not at all. The research indicates most were, confident English speakers. Many held professional jobs.
Especially in healthcare, wasn't it? Like a third of them?
Yeah, that stood out. And they'd been in the UK for different amounts of time, anywhere from just a year up to 20 years.
Wow, quite a range.
And involved in this church for, say, 1 to 6 years.
So when you look at that whole picture,
what jumps out is that active choice, choosing to join a congregation that's, predominantly white British.
Yeah.
It really suggests a kind of deliberate wanting to integrate into the local religious life.
So for you listening,
Yeah.
whether you're involved in a church yourself, or maybe you're just interested in how cultures mix, or, you just like learning new things, this deep dive should offer some real aha moments, I think.
Hopefully.
We're going to look at why they made this choice, how they see church, how they see mission.
And what that might mean for making faith communities, richer, more dynamic.
Exactly. So let's start with that first point, their idea of church.
Yeah. What really struck me in the research was how consistently they used words like home and family, belonging, community, even social, hospitable. What do you reckon fosters that really strong connection?
Well, it paints a picture, doesn't it? That the church is way more than just, showing up on a Sunday.
Much more.
They literally called it, and I'm quoting here, the source of all our relationships.
Wow.
And the center of the community, a place where they build connections with God, yes, but also really crucially with each other, becoming, as they put it, the body of Christ.
Exactly. And it wasn't just sort of vague feelings. They saw a real purpose there.
Like what?
Providing that space for worship, obviously, but also for mutual support. And they felt that allowed blessings to flow to the wider community.
Right, outwards.
Yeah, and there was that one really vivid image that came up in a discussion.
You mean the watering hole metaphor?
That's the one.
Yeah, that really stuck with me too. Someone described the church like that vital place back home, where people gather for something essential, water, literally.
Yeah.
Also, to share lives, stories, news.
And the fascinating thing was how they linked it straight to the Bible, to Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. It just shows this deep understanding of church as a place for, vital exchange and connection, just like that biblical encounter.
Okay, so if that's how they see church, what were the main reasons pulling them towards this specific LEP church? It wasn't just any old church, right?
No, definitely not just any church. The study pulled out several key drivers.
What?
A really strong desire to, quote, get involved,
Okay.
to nurture my faith, and importantly, to feel like they were truly part of the local community. Those came up again and again.
And friendships seemed massive, too.
Hugely important, yeah. Several people actually said the church felt more of a family than a church.
Wow.
Which points to this really profound sense of, acceptance, belonging. What do you think created that kind of family vibe?
Well, one interesting thing seems to be the location itself. Being in a relatively new town,
How so?
it meant the largely white British folks there maybe also had a bit more natural curiosity about newcomers generally.
Yeah, I see. Shared newness, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. So questions like, how long have you lived here?
Yeah.
Or where did you come from? They felt normal, friendly,
Right.
which apparently contrasted quite sharply with experiences some had in more established towns where they might have felt a bit, well, ignored in church.
That's a really interesting point about the social dynamics of a new town, that shared experience creating openness. But it wasn't all perfect from day one, was it?
Hmm.
Some mentioned an initial sort of casualness in the welcome.
Yes, and this highlights those tricky cultural expectations, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Some found that initial informality may be a bit off-putting or unfamiliar, but then they also really valued the genuine interest people showed later on.
Like noticing if someone missed a service.
Exactly, stuff like that. It shows how different ways of welcoming land differently.
Mm.
Like some liked not being asked to stand up and introduce themselves publicly first time,
Okay.
whereas others felt that actually made them feel a bit less welcomed, less seen.
It's complex. And the actual worship style, that played a part too, didn't it? Generally positive about the informal, contemporary approach.
Yeah, mostly positive. Though a few did say they'd like maybe a bit more variety in the music, perhaps some songs from other traditions.
Understandable.
But overall, yeah, they seemed content. And crucially, they really valued getting chances to actually participate in services.
Like leading prayers, reading.
Yeah, that kind of thing. They saw it as a real, tangible sign of equality in the congregation.
Makes sense. And what about the ecumenical aspect, the LEP bringing different denominations together? How much did that matter? Was it a big draw?
It's interesting, actually. They saw it as a good thing, definitely. Promoted flexibility, openness.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't usually the main reason they chose that church. It was more about the emphasis on just worshiping together, creating this sense of unity across different backgrounds.
Like that quote, an umbrella bringing you all together.
Exactly that. It fostered that feeling.
And there's also that conscious choice some made to avoid what they called homogenous churches.
Yeah, and spiritual ghettoism.
Right. Meaning churches mainly serving one ethnic group. What's behind that choice? What does that tell us about their integration goals?
It really highlights, I think, their desire to be part of the wider British society, not separate from it.
Yeah.
And they saw this local church as a kind of bridge, really, helping them make connections, build relationships within the broader community, not just within the church walls.
Right. Facilitating that integration.
And we absolutely shouldn't forget their kids in all this. That was a big factor.
Yes, the children. Absolutely. The church's youth work was a major draw for parents, wasn't it?
Huge. It offered, spiritual input, a Christian peer group, but also it upheld values they really cared about. So it helped their kids fit into British culture while keeping that Christian foundation.
And the parents themselves felt boosted by it, too.
Yeah, many felt being in a multi-ethnic church actually strengthened their own faith, seeing faith lived out in different ways, perhaps.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Talk about their views on transnational churches.
Right. Those churches often set up by and primarily for specific migrant communities.
Exactly. And the research showed some interesting variations depending on where people came from.
Okay.
So take the Indian respondents, mostly from Kerala, often with a Syrian Orthodox background. What was their take? Why choose the LEP over a potentially more familiar church setting?
Well, they definitely still felt connected to their Syrian Orthodox roots, maybe remembering the importance of community rituals, fasting, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But they found their day-to-day spiritual needs were actually met well in the LEP. They specifically mentioned liking the English services helped with integration.
And practicality.
Yeah, and the shorter service times often just fitted better with, busy professional lives.
Right. And there was something about a different emphasis on faith and community compared to India, wasn't there?
Yes, exactly. They seem to value the maybe greater focus on individual faith journey and personal practice they found in the UK church,
Contrasting it with.
with what they sometimes saw as a more communal, perhaps even slightly scrutinizing environment back home. More individual autonomy here, perhaps.
I see. Okay, what about the African respondents? Their relationship with transnational Pentecostal churches sounded a bit different.
Yeah, quite different for many. Lots had experience with those churches, the ones with mainly African members.
But they preferred the LEP. Why was that?
Several reasons came up. For some, it was just unfamiliarity with Pentecostal worship styles or specific doctrines.
Yeah.
Others wanted to stay within their original denomination, maybe Anglican or Methodist.
Right.
And there were also some concerns raised about, well, what's often called prosperity teaching, the emphasis on material wealth as a sign of blessing.
Exactly. And also sometimes concerns about the very significant demands on time and finances they observed in some of those churches.
Okay. And the study mentioned some social dynamics, too.
Yeah.
Things that made people uncomfortable.
Yeah, a few mentioned feeling uneasy about perceived sort of social hierarchies within some transnational fellowships,
Right.
maybe based on country of origin or status.
Mm.
And some disliked what felt like overly intrusive personal questions.
Right.
So by contrast, they appreciated the relative anonymity and the feeling of sanctuary they got in the LEP.
That's really interesting. But it's also worth noting, isn't it, that while they chose the LEP as their main church,
Yeah.
many still had their own smaller, informal groups on the side. Cultural groups, prayer groups.
Ah, yes. What was the thinking there?
It really shows the complexity of fitting in, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
These smaller groups seem to be a way to keep hold of their cultural heritage, maybe fulfill specific family duties.
Sort of operating alongside their church involvement.
Yeah, kind of parallel. Balancing that desire to integrate with the need to maintain cultural identity. It's not either.
A balancing act. Okay, let's move on to their understanding of mission. How did these folks define it, and what did they see as their part in it, especially here in the UK?
Well, for the people in this study, their Christian commitment wasn't just an abstract thing. It was meant to naturally flow out into their everyday lives.
Through actions, witness.
Exactly. As they put it, representing God, trying to be a good example in how they lived and interacted with people.
And it went beyond just, talking about faith, right?
Yeah.
What else did they see as mission?
Absolutely. Being a good neighbor locally was key. Sharing faith, yes, when the moment felt right. Prayer, definitely.
Practical things, too.
Yeah. Supporting family back home, working to reduce poverty in their countries of origin, maybe helping with education projects there. It was broad.
And how did they sum it up?
They talked about mission as fitting our faith into our specific circumstances, using your own gifts and talents, really an attitude of service.
Did the history of mission come up? The 19th century missionaries?
It did, yeah. For some, that brought specific projects for people to mind from their home countries.
But they saw things differently now.
Oh, yes. There was a clear sense that understanding has shifted, recognizing the role of, indigenous missionaries, and that mission flows globally now in all directions.
Not just one way.
Not just one way. And they generally expected mission to start local, right there in the church, then move out to the community, and then globally.
Through things like Bible study, teaching, practical help.
Yeah, supporting youth work, international aid, all that stuff.
Now, the question about their specific role as migrants in God's mission in the UK, that seemed to be a newer thought for many.
It did seem to spark some fresh thinking. For some, their own journey, being a migrant,
Gave them empathy.
Exactly. A unique position and maybe a desire to help other migrants, students, asylum seekers, offering support, understanding.
And maybe bridging gaps.
Yeah, some saw potential to help connect the LEP with maybe some immigrant-led churches, building partnerships.
But there were also some tricky dynamics observed around how their contributions were received by the white British members.
Yes. On the one hand, some genuine appreciation for, say, different worship styles migrants brought, finding it interesting. But on the other hand, some instances where migrants felt a bit patronized.
Oh, dear.
Like that comment, it's good to be preached to by someone who really knows poverty.
Oof. Yeah, that highlights the sensitivities, doesn't it, in cross-cultural church life?
It really does. And overall, they felt their impact on mission was kind of dependent on how accepted they felt.
And whether the native British members were willing to genuinely share power, share resources. It points to needing real partnership.
Absolutely. And another big thing was their awareness of the challenges around verbal witness in the UK.
Sharing faith openly.
Yeah. They're quite cautious, worried about maybe negative reactions at work, for instance, and just perceiving a cultural difference around how publicly acceptable it is to talk about faith here.
So that created some unease about how to do it effectively.
Yeah, a real sense of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And even wondering if British people generally had enough basic understanding of Christianity anymore to make informed choices about faith.
That's quite an observation. And interestingly, they expressed concern for the spiritual state of the white British population, too.
They did, even while seeing their generosity to charity and so on.
What was the concern?
Some felt there was maybe a lack of deep personal relationship with Jesus among some white British Christians they knew. And they also wondered if maybe consumerism, comfortable lifestyles, might actually be barriers to faith here.
So they were really engaging with the spiritual health of their new society.
Definitely. It shows they weren't just passive attendees. They were thinking deeply.
Okay, so let's try and pull the main threads together. What are the big takeaways from all this research?
Well, first off, for these migrants, mission wasn't some separate activity. It was really rooted in being part of that local church.
Right, that sense of belonging, integrating, becoming part of the church's culture. That was the foundation for mission.
Exactly. And it's also key that while they really wanted that welcoming Christian community, they weren't necessarily looking for a church that just copied the social structures or exact norms from back home.
Interesting. Why do you think that was? What did they prefer about the LEP context?
It seems they perhaps appreciated maybe a slightly lower level of expected involvement sometimes, or the greater emphasis on, individual expression of faith common in Western settings.
Okay.
So this focus on integration, on unity, it led to this sort of adapted, enculturated way of being Christian, actively trying to understand and navigate British culture appropriately.
So it sounds like while they were generally happy with the church,
Mostly, yeah.
there might be some untapped potential there.
Yeah.
In terms of deeper involvement, maybe more proactive mission stuff. Why might that be?
Well, perhaps being content with the worship, feeling welcomed, maybe inadvertently meant their potential for broader contribution wasn't fully realized. Or maybe they didn't fully see themselves as key players yet.
Despite having so much to offer.
Right. Their limited involvement beyond Sundays, that slight hesitation about outward mission, it could suggest that they didn't quite assume they were full participants in that sense. But as we've seen, their cultural insights, their concerns for British society, they're incredibly valuable potential partners for any church thinking about its mission.
Yeah, huge potential. And the research really throws up some big questions for the church itself, doesn't it? About diversity, integration.
It really does. What stands out for you there?
Well, the LEP clearly valued having a multi-ethnic congregation, seeing it as reflecting the universal church.
Which is great.
But that strong emphasis on integration, it makes you ask, how do you truly showcase the diversity for God's glory, not just blend it away?
Good point. Because if you just get a kind of superficial harmony by ignoring the differences,
you risk missing the richness, don't you? The unique experiences migrants bring, and you might accidentally end up expecting everyone to just assimilate.
yeah, become like the majority.
And thinking about their deep idea of church as home and family, maybe exploring that could be really revealing for the white British members.
How so?
It could help them see their own cultural assumptions about church, community, belonging, things they might just take for granted, but which might be quite different for others.
Makes you reflect on your own perspective.
Definitely. And ultimately, it seems the real challenge, but also the real opportunity, is moving beyond just being multi-ethnic.
And to becoming genuinely interethnic. What's the difference there in practice?
Well, it's moving past just having diverse people in the room to intentionally creating spaces where that diversity actually informs and shapes everyone, where different backgrounds mutually enrich each other's faith and practice.
I see. So it's interactive.
Exactly. That's real integration. That's deeper unity, not just side by side.
Okay. So this deep dive today, looking at these migrant Christians in a native British church, it's given us a really complex, nuanced picture, hasn't it?
It really has. Integration, adapting faith, a unique view on mission.
Their choice, that active choice to join local churches, and offer some really valuable lessons, I think, about welcome, belonging.
And just the changing face of Christian community today.
That study really put its finger on that untapped potential, didn't it?
Yeah.
All that richness of experience and perspective that migrant Christians bring. It really makes you think, doesn't it, for you listening? How could intentionally fostering that kind of interethnic engagement where different backgrounds really do inform and enrich each other, how could that genuinely strengthen your community or even just your own understanding of faith?
It's a powerful question. And really, this deep dive has just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore about migration, culture, faith, how they all interact. We really hope it sparked some curiosity for you and maybe encouraged you to think about the diverse voices contributing to the spiritual world all around us.